At Thanksgiving dinner, they poured my drink down the sink. Then the chef handed me a mic. It was supposed to be a normal Thanksgiving dinner, but instead they poured my drink down the sink right in front of me, like I didn't matter at all. And then, just when I thought I couldn't feel any smaller, the chef walked out and handed me a microphone. I'm not exaggerating when I say that moment changed everything. You might think it sounds dramatic, but when your entire identity shifts in a split second, when the truth you've never been told comes crashing in front of a room full of people, yeah, it's dramatic. So let me start from the beginning and tell you how it all happened. I always thought I was just the poor cousin, the one they invited out of pity every holiday season. My clothes never matched the vibe of their fancy dinners. My shoes were always a little too worn, and my drink was always juice from a box while theirs came from glass bottles I couldn't even pronounce. But I still showed up, smiled, and pretended not to notice the stares, the whispers, the forced hugs. It was just one night, right? Just one dinner. This year felt no different at first. The house was massive, filled with velvet curtains, gold-trimmed plates, and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with roasted turkey. I walked in clutching my small gift bag, heart pounding. I could already hear laughter echoing from the dining room, where the rest of the family was gathered around the long candlelit table. And then I saw him, Lucas, my so-called cousin. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect life. His designer sweater probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Lucas greeted me with a smirk, that usual smug tone in his voice. "You're late," he said, like I was a server who forgot his order. I just nodded and walked to the kitchen to drop off the dessert I brought. I'd made it myself. Apple pie. The crust was a little uneven, but I was proud. The chef took it with a glance and placed it at the far end of the counter, away from the others. I didn't say anything. I never did. Dinner was a circus of polite smiles and passive-aggressive comments. They talked about ski trips, art auctions, and luxury schools. I sat quietly, chewing slowly, careful not to make a sound. Whenever I tried to join the conversation, someone would talk over me. Lucas, of course, was the loudest. He kept making jokes about the way I dressed, the way I talked, even the way I held my fork. Everyone laughed. Even the adults. Even my so-called aunt, who gave me a look like I should be grateful just to be there. Then came the toast. Someone stood up and clinked their glass. Everyone raised theirs, champagne flutes filled with sparkling cider, or wine, or whatever was deemed appropriate. I reached for my own glass, a simple plastic cup filled with juice, and held it up. That's when Lucas grabbed it from my hand, smiled wickedly, and walked straight to the sink. I thought he was joking. I thought maybe he was going to refill it with something fancier. But he turned, looked me in the eye, and poured the whole thing down the drain. "Oops," he said. "Must have been a mistake." The room erupted in laughter. My cheeks burned. My hands trembled. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I wanted to cry, to scream, to run, but I just sat there, staring at the empty space where my drink had been. No one stopped him. No one said a word, not even the chef, who was standing just a few feet away, watching everything. I excused myself quietly and walked toward the hallway, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I leaned against the wall, trying to hold back tears. I hated that they made me feel like this, like I was nothing, like I didn't belong. But I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes, and turned back toward the dining room. And that's when the chef approached me. He wasn't smiling. His expression was serious, almost troubled. I straightened up, unsure of what to expect. He held out something to me, a microphone. At first I didn't understand. Was this some kind of joke? But then he leaned in and whispered, "It's time." I blinked. "Time for what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't answer. He just nodded toward the dining room, where everyone was still laughing, still celebrating. I held the mic in my hand, confused, scared, and a little angry. Why would he give this to me now? He walked ahead of me, and I followed, clutching the microphone like it was the only thing keeping me from disappearing. When I stepped back into the dining room, all eyes turned to me. The room went quiet, dead silent. The kind of silence that presses down on your shoulders, makes it hard to breathe. Lucas chuckled. "What's this? Karaoke now?" He laughed again, and a few others joined him. But the chef didn't laugh. He stood behind me like a wall, arms crossed. I looked down at the mic, then up at the room. I should have dropped it. I should have walked away. But instead I spoke. At first my voice was shaky, barely audible, but as I kept talking it grew steadier. I didn't even know what I was saying at first, just feelings spilling out. I talked about how I always felt like an outsider in my own family, how I was constantly reminded of what I didn't have, how even a glass of juice could become a weapon in a place like this. I saw faces shift. Some looked guilty, others uncomfortable. Lucas rolled his eyes and leaned back, clearly amused. But I didn't stop. I talked about how I was tired of pretending, tired of shrinking myself so they could feel bigger. I said I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. Not tonight. Then the chef stepped forward and cleared his throat. He looked around the room slowly, his eyes hard and unreadable. And what he said next made my stomach twist. "She's not your cousin," he said. "She's your sister." The silence that followed was different this time. Heavy, real. I stood frozen, microphone still in hand, heart racing so fast I thought I might faint. And he wasn't done yet. He took a breath, eyes scanning every stunned face in the room. I watched as people shifted in their seats, unsure if this was a cruel joke or some performance. But the chef's voice was steady, full of something deeper than drama. It was certainty. He looked at me, then back at them. "You heard me," he repeated. "She's not your cousin. She's your sister." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. My ears were ringing. Sister? That didn't make sense. My mind raced, trying to catch up with his words, but everything felt fuzzy and slow. I stared at Lucas, whose expression had shifted from smug to pale and confused. What did that mean? Was this some twisted prank? The chef turned to me, his eyes softening. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," he said. "This wasn't how it was supposed to happen." But they left me no choice. The whole room stared at him now, a mix of confusion and disbelief on their faces. My so-called aunt stood up, lips parted, as if about to say something, but no sound came. I looked at Lucas again, searching for some reaction, some acknowledgement that he understood before I did. But he just shook his head slowly. "No, that can't be true. She's lying. This is crazy." He stood up and glared at the chef. "You're just the cook. Why would anyone believe you?" The chef didn't flinch. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and held it up. "This is a birth certificate. Her real one. The name listed for the parents, same as yours, Lucas." He placed it on the table like a final card in a game no one knew they were playing. My hands trembled as I walked closer. The room was spinning, but I had to see it for myself. I picked it up. My name, my birth date, and there they were. 2 names I'd heard my entire life. The same names Lucas called Mom and Dad. I stumbled back a step, unable to process what I was reading. Everything I knew about myself shattered in that moment. I wasn't just the poor cousin. I was their daughter. I was his sister. I turned to the woman I'd called aunt my whole life. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Say something," I whispered. "Please, is it true?" She didn't answer right away. Her hands were shaking. Finally, she sat down, hard, like the weight of the lie had finally hit her. "We didn't know how to tell you," she said quietly. "It was a different time. We made a mistake." A mistake? I felt like I'd been punched. I took a step back, then another. My heart was racing, my head pounding. "So you just gave me away, hid me, and invited me over every year like a guest? I was your daughter. I was family." Lucas stood frozen, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "This is insane," he muttered. "No one told me. I didn't know." But something in his eyes told me he did. Maybe not the whole story, but enough to treat me like I didn't belong. Enough to pour my drink down the sink with that smug little smile. The room was dead silent. You could hear every breath. The chef placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "You deserve to know who you are," he said. I nodded slowly, barely holding back tears. All my life I thought I was less, just a guest at someone else's table. But I wasn't. I was born to sit at that table just like everyone else. The woman, my mother, I guess, looked at me with tears in her eyes. "We thought we were doing the right thing. We were young. We made choices we regretted. We never stopped thinking about you. I didn't know whether to scream or collapse. I had a family, a real one, and they let me grow up believing I was something else entirely. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was tight and my chest felt hollow. Lucas still hadn't moved. I turned to him, voice trembling. "Do you still think I don't belong here?" He didn't answer. His silence said more than words ever could. Suddenly, I wasn't embarrassed about the juice or the pie or the way I held my fork. I wasn't small anymore. I was someone with a name, a story, a past that had been hidden from me. And now it was all out in the open. I looked at the chef, the man who had shattered the lie. Why now? Why tonight? He gave me a half smile. Because you were brave enough to speak. Because someone had to. And because it's time you got your seat back at the table. The dining room remained silent as I turned and walked to my chair. This time I sat down not as a guest, not as the poor cousin, but as the daughter they had forgotten and the sister they tried to ignore. The weight of truth was heavy, but it was mine now. And for the first time in my life, I held my head high. No one spoke for what felt like forever. I sat there, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, heart thudding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The air in the room had changed. The warmth of the candles, the golden glow of the chandelier, even the smell of roasted turkey. It all felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. Everyone was still staring at me, but not with the same condescending glances I was used to. This time it was something different. Guilt, shock, maybe even fear. Lucas finally broke the silence. He scoffed, shoved his chair back, and stood up. So what now? You want an apology? A hug? He laughed dryly. Congrats, I guess. You win. You're one of us. Happy? His words were sharp, and his voice dripped with bitterness. It hit me harder than I expected, because I realized something in that moment. I wasn't looking for his acceptance anymore. Not his approval, not his fake smiles. I looked up at him, meeting his eyes for the first time since the truth came out. I don't want anything from you, I said calmly. You can keep your jokes and your ego. This isn't about you. Lucas looked like he wanted to argue, but then just turned and walked out of the room without another word. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the hallway until they vanished completely. I glanced around the table. No one knew what to say. A few people had their heads down, pretending to check their phones. Others just stared blankly at their plates. I guess the masks had finally cracked. I felt like I was seeing them all for who they really were for the first time. Not as some glamorous, perfect family, but as people hiding behind layers of lies. My mother, no, the woman who raised Lucas, reached out with trembling fingers to touch my hand. I didn't pull away. Not yet. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have told you years ago. I just couldn't bear to face what we did. Her voice broke. You were such a beautiful baby. I didn't want to let you go, but we felt we had to. We thought someone else could give you a better life. I was only 17. Her eyes pleaded with mine, but my heart was numb. Better life? I asked quietly. I lived in a shelter when I was 7. I bounced between families who didn't even remember my birthday. I ate cold spaghetti out of a can more nights than I can count. Was that better? She covered her mouth, her body shaking with silent sobs. The man next to her, my father apparently, rubbed her back but didn't say a word. I wanted to scream, to cry, but I'd done all that before. In other places, at other times, when no one cared enough to listen. Now I had an audience, but I didn't want their pity. I just wanted the truth. And now that I had it, it burned like fire. The chef sat down quietly beside me. He didn't speak either, but I felt his presence like a calm anchor in a storm. I finally asked, "How do you know all of this? Why were you the one to tell me?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small faded photograph. It was of a young couple, my parents. They were holding a baby, me. I stared at it, heart caught in my throat. "I was your uncle's best friend," he said softly. "I was there when you were born. I knew what happened. And when I found out you were back in their lives, but they weren't telling you the truth, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I needed you to know." He looked at me, his eyes steady. "You deserve to know who you are. Not just where you came from, but who you've always been." My fingers closed around the photo like it was a piece of my soul. I stared at the baby's face. My face. And something inside me cracked, but in a good way. Like something had been set free. I stood up slowly. I wasn't sure what I was going to say next, but my body knew it was time. I turned to face the room again. Everyone was watching, still silent. I cleared my throat. "You all thought I was less than you. Just some charity case with no place at this table. You judged my clothes, my words, my food, even my drink." I let the words hang in the air. "But the truth is, I'm not a guest here. I'm not some outsider you get to look down on. I belong here. Whether you like it or not, I'm family. Blood. I have the same last name, the same history, the same right to be loved." No one interrupted me. No one dared. I turned to the chef. "Thank you. For telling me the truth. For seeing me. He nodded, quiet and firm. Then I picked up the microphone again. My voice didn't shake this time. And this part I never expected, I started to sing. I don't know why. Maybe it was the pressure inside me that needed release. Maybe it was the silence that begged for sound. But I sang. A simple song my foster mother used to hum when things were hard. My voice filled the room, and for once no one laughed. No one mocked. They just listened. When I finished, there were tears on faces I never thought capable of emotion. A few clapped. Others just stared. And for the first time in my life, I felt powerful. Not because they saw me, but because I had finally seen myself. Then I placed the microphone down, turned to the table and said, "I think I'll have that drink now." This time, no one dared take it from me. One of the servers quietly walked over and placed a glass in front of me. It wasn't in a plastic cup. It wasn't juice from a box. It was the same sparkling cider the others had been drinking, poured into one of their elegant crystal glasses. I picked it up slowly, feeling the weight of it, how it caught the light, how the bubbles shimmered like something alive. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Just holding that glass was enough. The room remained in stunned silence. I sat back down, this time not trying to shrink myself. I took up space. Real deserved space. For years I had trained myself to sit quietly, to blend in, to never disturb their perfect little gatherings. But the truth had already done what I never could. It disturbed everything. And now that the damage was done, I wasn't about to clean up after it. Let them sit in the mess they created. Across the table, I saw my mother trying to compose herself. Her hands trembled as she reached for a napkin to dab at her tears. I could see her lips moving like she wanted to say something else, but I didn't want to hear it. Not yet, not after all these years of silence. I wasn't ready to give forgiveness just because the truth had finally been dragged into the light. My father, or the man who had never once acknowledged me as his own, finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, brittle, like it hadn't been used in years. "We should have told you," he said. "I won't make excuses. I thought I was protecting my family. I didn't realize I was breaking it." He didn't cry. He just looked at me like he wanted to, but didn't think he had the right. I nodded slowly, not because I forgave him, but because I understood. People made cruel choices when they were scared. That didn't make it okay, but I wasn't going to carry the weight of their fear anymore. I'd carried it long enough. Then something strange happened. The younger cousins, who had always watched me from a distance like I was some foreign creature, began to shift in their seats. One of them, a girl with pigtails and round glasses, looked at me and whispered, "You sing really good." Another one, barely 10, added, "I didn't know you were like part of the family." His words weren't cruel. They were just honest, pure. And somehow, that hurt more than all the adult silence in the room. I looked at them. Really looked. They were just kids. They weren't responsible for the secrets or the lies or the way I had been pushed aside. But now they were watching me, curious, maybe even a little in awe. And I knew this was my chance to be something different. Not a victim, not an outcast, but someone who could change the story moving forward. I motioned for the little girl to come closer. She hesitated, then slid off her chair and walked over to me. I bent down and whispered, "Never let anyone make you feel small. Not even your family." She nodded solemnly, and for a moment, I saw a spark in her eyes. Something that made my chest ache in the best way. The chef, who had been silent again this whole time, finally cleared his throat. "If it's all right with everyone, dessert is ready. There's a special pie made by our guest of honor tonight." He looked directly at me, unless she'd like to introduce it herself. I blinked. I had forgotten all about the apple pie I had made, the one that was shoved to the corner of the counter like it didn't matter. Suddenly, it felt important again. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and picked up the pie. It wasn't perfect. The crust was still uneven. But it was mine. It was honest. And for the first time, it was going to be served like it mattered. I placed it in the center of the dessert table and said, "I made this. It's not store-bought. It's not fancy, but I worked hard on it. And if you don't want to eat it, that's fine. But it's going to stay right here." A few people hesitated. Then one of the older women, someone who'd never looked at me twice, walked up and cut herself a slice. She took a bite, closed her eyes, then nodded. "It's good. Actually, it's better than good." I watched as others slowly followed. One slice turned into 4, then 7. Soon the pie was almost gone. And in a way, so was the shame I'd been carrying. Not all of it. Not forever. But enough to let me breathe. Enough to stand a little taller. I looked around the room and realized something had shifted. Maybe not for everyone. Maybe not permanently. But something had cracked open. The lies had been aired. The roles flipped. The illusion shattered. And through all of that, I had found my voice. Not just the singing voice, though. That helped. But the voice that refused to stay quiet. That refused to accept less. That demanded truth and space and dignity. The girl who had walked in tonight wasn't the same girl standing here now. And thank God for that. Because she had been invisible. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen, heard, and finally acknowledged. After dessert, the mood in the room shifted again. Not in a loud celebratory way, but something quieter. Like everyone was walking on thin ice, unsure how to take the next step. The laughter didn't come back. The wine glasses weren't clinking like before. But for once, the silence wasn't cutting. It was thoughtful. Still, almost respectful. I stayed in my seat while others got up to stretch, chat in small groups or clear dishes. My glass was empty, but I didn't move. I didn't need to. For the first time ever, people moved around me, not past me. No one pushed me aside or pretended I wasn't there. And even though no one dared to sit next to me, I didn't feel alone. I kept thinking about what the chef had said earlier, about how it was time I knew who I was. And I realized something that had never clicked before. I had always been looking for permission to exist, permission to speak, to belong. But all this time, the only permission I really needed was my own. The woman, my mother, approached me slowly. Her hands were clasped together, knuckles white. She stood a few feet away, eyes unsure, and waited for me to say something first. I didn't. I just watched her, measured, guarded. She finally spoke. Would you let me tell you everything? About how it happened? Why? Maybe not tonight. Maybe later, but sometime. Please. I nodded, but only once. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I wasn't going to deny her the chance to speak either. I deserved answers. All of them. And for once, she looked like she was finally ready to give them. Lucas didn't come back. Not that night. Maybe not ever. And honestly, I didn't care. He could sulk in whatever corner of the mansion he wanted. The truth didn't need his approval. I didn't need his redemption. I had lived long enough in his shadow. Now he had to live in the truth of mine. I got up and walked to the window, pressing my fingers against the cold glass. The world outside was quiet, blanketed in soft snow that had started falling without anyone noticing. The lights from the city sparkled in the distance. It was beautiful, but also fragile, like a new beginning trying to find its footing. Behind me, I heard the quiet sound of footsteps. It was the chef again. He stopped beside me, looking out the window too. You did good, he said. I shook my head. I didn't do anything special. I just told the truth. He smiled slightly. That's the most special thing you can do in a room full of liars. We stood there for a long moment in silence, just watching the snow. Then I asked the question that had been digging at the back of my mind. Why did you keep the secret for so long? He sighed. Because it wasn't my truth to tell, and because I hoped they'd do the right thing before it was too late. He turned to me. But they didn't. And when I saw you come in tonight so quiet, so defeated, I knew I couldn't let it continue. I nodded. I appreciated his honesty, more than he probably knew. Because in a world where everything about my life had been fake or hidden or twisted, honesty felt like a rare kind of love. Eventually, I made my way back to the dining room. The table had been cleared. The candles had burned low. Some of the guests were getting ready to leave. My mother hovered by the door, clearly unsure whether to hug me, speak to me, or stay out of my way. I walked past her without a word, grabbed my coat, and stepped out into the cold night. The snow crunched softly beneath my shoes. My breath curled in the air. I stood there for a long time, staring up at the sky. I could still feel the sting of everything I'd learned, the betrayal, the abandonment, but I also felt something else, a strange kind of freedom. I was no longer just the poor girl who showed up every year and got laughed at. I was no longer the invisible guest or the easy target. I was someone with a past, a name, and a story that was mine alone to tell. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe my parents would try to fix what they broke. Maybe Lucas would pretend it never happened. Maybe nothing would change at all. But I had changed, and that was enough. I walked down the snowy path away from the house, the wind brushing gently against my face. In my pocket, I still had the photo the chef had given me. I held it tightly, feeling the paper bend slightly between my fingers. It was proof, Not just of where I came from, but of where I was going. Because I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the truth. Not of them. Not of who I was. And when I reached the street, I turned back one last time to look at the glowing house behind me. It looked smaller now. Quieter. Just another place full of people trying to pretend they had it all together. And I walked forward. Not as a guest, not as a forgotten girl, but as someone finally writing her own story. The snow kept falling, soft and slow as I walked away from the house. The cold stung my cheeks, but I didn't pull my scarf tighter. I welcomed the chill. It reminded me I was still here, still real. My footsteps left clear prints in the fresh snow behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was leaving a mark. Not just in the snow, but in the world. I wasn't fading into the background anymore. I was moving forward. I didn't go home right away. I wasn't even sure what home meant anymore. The apartment I rented was small, quiet, barely furnished. But it was mine. Mine in a way nothing at that house ever had been. Still, I wasn't ready to sit in that silence yet. I needed time, space, somewhere to breathe. So I kept walking, block after block, past lit-up storefronts and cozy diners, past people bundled up with arms full of leftovers and wrapped gifts. Everyone was celebrating. Everyone was going somewhere, and yet I didn't feel alone. Not tonight. Not anymore. I ended up at the park, the one I used to visit when I was younger, when the foster homes got too loud or too cruel. It was quiet now, just the crunch of snow under my boots and the distant sound of traffic. I sat on a bench and stared at the empty playground, lit by dim orange streetlights. I remembered swinging there once, dreaming of having a family who looked for me, who loved me enough to keep me. It's funny, isn't it? How life gives you what you thought you wanted, but not in the way you imagined. I had a family all along. They just didn't want me. Not then, maybe not even now. And that realization hurt deeply, but it also freed me. I didn't need their permission to be whole. I didn't need to prove anything to people who had erased me. I took the photo out of my coat pocket and looked at it again. My mother looked so young in it. My father, too. They were smiling, holding me like I was their entire world. What happened between that moment and now? Fear? Shame? Pressure? Whatever it was, it turned love into silence, and silence into distance. But I wasn't the scared little girl in that picture anymore. I had survived more than they would ever know. And now, I wasn't going to be quiet about any of it. I wasn't going to disappear. I had a voice. I had a name. And I had the truth. I pulled out my phone and opened a blank note. I wasn't sure what I was writing. Maybe a letter. Maybe a speech. Maybe just a journal entry. But the words flowed easily now. I am not your secret. I am not your shame. I am not the silence you hid behind. I am the girl you left behind, and the woman you'll never silence again. I stared at those lines, heart pounding. They felt right. Sharp, real. I'd let them sit in the pit of my stomach for years. But now they were out in the open, where they belonged. This was just the beginning. I stood up, brushed the snow off my coat, and started walking back toward my apartment. The city lights glowed in the distance, and even though I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, whether they'd reach out or bury the truth again, I knew who I was now. And knowing who you are, that changes everything. A few blocks later, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. I know it doesn't mean much now, but I'm sorry. I didn't know how to be a brother. Maybe I never will, but you deserved better. Lucas? I stared at the message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen, unsure whether to reply or delete it. In the end, I didn't do either. Not tonight. Some things needed time. Some people needed space to figure out if they were ready to change, or just sorry they got caught. I reached my building, climbed the stairs slowly, and opened the door to my apartment. The warmth hit me instantly. It smelled like cinnamon and candles. My small tree in the corner blinked softly with cheap fairy lights. I took off my coat and stood in the middle of the room, letting it all sink in. This was my space. My life. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I walked to the window and looked out over the city, where snow was still falling and everything felt washed clean. And then I smiled. Not because everything was okay, but because I finally was. I spent the next few days in a strange kind of stillness. Not numb exactly, more like suspended. I wasn't angry all the time anymore. I wasn't crying either. It was like my body had gone into recovery mode, processing everything in slow motion. Every time I passed a mirror, I'd stop and stare. Not out of vanity, just curiosity. I kept asking myself, Who am I now? And the truth was, I wasn't sure. But for once, I wanted to find out. I didn't hear from them right away. Not my parents, not Lucas, not the chef. The silence wasn't hostile this time. It was cautious. As if everyone was waiting to see what I'd do next. I wasn't in a rush. Let them wait. I'd spent most of my life waiting for someone to see me, to claim me, to love me. Now the tables had turned. The message from Lucas stayed on my phone. I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because I didn't trust him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He hadn't just been mean. He'd enjoyed my pain. He turned my humiliation into entertainment. And even if he hadn't known the truth, he knew enough to be better. He chose cruelty. That didn't disappear overnight. Still, something about his message lingered. The way he wrote it, awkward, like it hurt him to be honest. I kept wondering what it meant. Was he ashamed? Or just afraid I'd tell everyone what he'd done? Either way, it didn't change what he'd taken from me. My dignity, my belonging, my voice, until I took it back. On the fourth night after Thanksgiving, I got a knock on my door. My heart stopped. I never had visitors, especially not this late. I tiptoed to the peephole. It was the chef. He was holding a brown paper bag and a box tied with ribbon. I opened the door slowly. He smiled, warm but cautious. "Thought you could use some dinner," he said, "and maybe some answers." I stepped aside to let him in. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air as he placed the bag on my tiny table. I watched him unpack the food, homemade lasagna, warm bread, salad. It was the kind of meal you made when you wanted someone to feel safe. We sat down quietly. For a while we just ate. No words, just clinking forks and the occasional hum of appreciation. It felt normal, comforting, like a pause between chapters. Then he spoke. "They loved you, you know. Your parents. They really did. They just got scared." His voice was gentle but firm. "They made a terrible mistake. But it wasn't because they didn't care." I looked at him trying to read his face. "How do you know that?" He sighed. "Because I saw it. The way your mom held you. The way your dad cried the day they signed the papers. They weren't monsters, just broken. And they never stopped thinking about you. They just didn't know how to face what they did. That didn't excuse it. But it softened something in me. Just a little. Enough to imagine the people in that photo not as villains, but as kids who got lost in the mess of life." He reached into the box and handed me a folder. It was thick. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Yellowed with age. All addressed to me. Never sent. I flipped through them slowly, fingers trembling. Some were from my mother. Some from my father. One even had a tiny drawing, crayons and scribbles. "Lucas. A letter he must have written as a little boy. We were going to tell you one day," one of the letters said. "We just keep running out of courage." Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. These words, these years, they mattered. But they didn't erase the silence. They didn't undo the nights I cried alone, or the birthdays I spent waiting by the phone. Still, I kept reading, and something inside me softened bit by bit. When the chef stood to leave, he paused at the door. "They're going to reach out. Soon. But only if you want them to. The choice is yours now." That night, I sat by my window, letters in my lap, heart full of fire and ache. I didn't know what I was going to say when they called, or if I'd answer. But I knew one thing for sure. This was my story now, and I was the one turning the page. The phone rang the next morning. It was early, barely light outside, and the sound jolted me out of a dream I couldn't remember. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, staring at the screen as if it might explode. The name read private number. No message, no clue, just the steady buzz in my hand daring me to answer. I almost let it ring out, almost threw the phone under my pillow and rolled over. But then I thought about everything. About the drink, the microphone, the pie, the truth. I thought about the girl who used to flinch every time her name was mispronounced in class. The girl who sat alone at recess. The girl who was always someone else's burden. And I picked up. "Hello?" Silence. Then quietly, as if from underwater. "It's me." It was her. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat had locked shut. But she kept talking. "I don't expect you to say anything. I just need you to listen. Please, just let me say it." I held the phone tighter, closed my eyes, and leaned back against the headboard. I let her speak. She started from the beginning. How she'd gotten pregnant at 17. How her parents had panicked. How they convinced her the only way to protect me was to let me go. How she'd held me for hours the day I was born and cried until she couldn't breathe. How she'd begged to keep me but felt powerless. How she wrote to me every year, even though she never knew where the letters were going. Then she told me how Lucas had found out, only recently, and how he didn't take it well. How he'd felt betrayed, confused, angry. How he turned that anger into cruelty. She said she didn't know about the drink, that if she had, she would have stopped it, that she was sorry. Over and over again she said it. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. When she finally paused, waiting for me to respond, I took a deep breath. My voice came out hoarse. Why didn't you fight harder? The line was quiet. Then broken and low, I didn't know how. And I hated myself every day for it. There was more talking. Some from her, some from me. It wasn't smooth or comforting. It was jagged, full of stops and stutters. But it was real. Honest, raw. By the time we hung up, my face was wet with tears I hadn't even noticed falling. A week passed. Then too, no calls from Lucas. No visits from anyone else. But the letters, they kept coming. One from my father, then another from her. Then a small envelope with no return address, but inside was a photo. Me and Lucas as toddlers, sitting side by side, grinning with ice cream all over our faces. Proof of a life I never remembered living. I didn't know what to do with it. I just kept it in the same box as the others, on my nightstand, where I could see it but didn't have to open it. And then, on the third Friday since Thanksgiving, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Lucas standing there, holding that same awkward posture he always had when he didn't know what to say. No smug grin. No designer jacket, just a hoodie and jeans. His hands were buried in his pockets, and his eyes were fixed on the ground. Hey, he said. Hey, can I come in? I didn't answer right away, but then I stepped aside. He sat on the edge of the couch, silent, fidgeting with a thread on his sleeve. I sat across from him, arms crossed, waiting. Look, I'm not here to be the hero, he said. I was awful to you. I know that. I was cruel. And I don't even have a good excuse. I was angry, I guess. Confused. You were the ghost in all the family stories. And when I realized the ghost was real, I didn't know what to do with that. I stayed quiet. He looked up, eyes full of something I hadn't seen in him before. Not pity, not guilt, shame. I don't expect you to forgive me. Honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you never spoke to me again. But I needed you to hear this from me, in person. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I'd spent so many years believing people who left, who lied, who let silence speak for them. So I told him, softly but clearly, forgiveness isn't a gift I give to people who show up once. He nodded. I know. We sat in silence after that. Not heavy, just quiet. And eventually he stood up and left. No pressure, no promises. Just a door closed gently behind him. And me, sitting in the middle of my apartment, feeling the weight of everything shift again. This wasn't the end of the story. But maybe, finally, it was the beginning of one I got to write. And that's how the truth came crashing into my life. Messy, painful, but necessary. I was never just the poor girl at the family dinner. I was the sister, the daughter, the missing piece they tried to bury. And even though I may never get all the answers or perfect apologies, I finally took control of my story. I found my voice, and I'm not giving it up again. If you made it to the end, drop a comment saying I stayed for the truth so I know you were with me all the way. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. There's more to come. My voice is just getting started,